Got a Dynasty startup draft ahead? Well, you better not screw it up. That draft is not only going to determine how competitive your team is this year, it could set you up as the envy of your league for seasons to come, or it could leave you playing catch up for the foreseeable future. We've got years of Dynasty League experience behind us, so we're laying out some strategies that have worked well for us and pointing out some key mistakes that we see every year. And you know what? We don't always agree. Whether you're getting ready for a superflex draft or one QB, you're going to want to hear this. An all-new Draft Sharks podcast starts right now. Matt Schaff, Jared Smola, and Shane Hallam of DraftSharks.com here. We stepped away from Dynasty over the past 2 episodes, but it is still prime Dynasty fantasy football season. So we're going to jump back into that format for this one, not focusing on specific players so much this time. However, we're talking strategy for Dynasty startup drafts, potentially some strategies that can stick with you for your team management beyond when you're actually drafting and apply to how you run that team. You can find our overall Dynasty strategy tips at DraftSharks.com. They've been up. We keep updating them. You can simply Google Dynasty strategy. You'll find us that way as well. So guys, before we get to our specific strategies, I wanted to start with this. Jared, what is your favorite aspect of playing Dynasty compared with other fantasy formats?
Yeah, for me, it's just building the roster, which is funny because in real life, you don't want me building anything. We bought one of those big play sets for the kids a couple of weeks ago, and I hired someone to put it together. I never even thought about putting that thing together. We paid him. He came over, did it in 8 hours for what would have taken me, 20 hours, and the thing would have collapsed the first time the kids got on it. So you don't want me building anything in real life, but in Dynasty, I just like building the roster, whether it's via the draft, via trades, via the waiver wire, just deciding how to allocate assets, how to build a team that is going to win a title, whether it's in the current year or 2 or 3 years down the road. Just kind of putting that puzzle together is my favorite part of Dynasty.
Jared, you might have a little bit too much expendable cash if you're just paying somebody as opposed to wasting a day and a half of your own time to put something together.
Hey, I work, so I don't have to do that kind of stuff.
As far as I'm concerned, you're not a dad until you stay up until 3:30 on Christmas Eve putting together the play kitchen for your kids. So that was an inflection point for me. Shane, what's your favorite aspect of playing Dynasty?
I think it's just more like being a real GM. I love trading up in drafts, trading back in drafts. Not something you get to do in redraft. Redraft, you just kind of sit there, wait for your pick to come up and pick a player. And here you can go out and get your players or look to the future, just like a real team. I also really like learning the other managers in my league, learn their tendencies, what positions do they like, what teams do they like, is there a way to exploit via trade some of their tendencies. I used to, I don't have time anymore, but I used to keep a notebook on every manager in every Dynasty league I was in, the moves that they made and how much they're spending in fab and what they're trading. And you start to really see patterns, and it's a really fun way to play.
That is the kind of sickness that we're going for in bringing you onto the staff, Shane. I'm happy both to hear that you are willing to go to that level of detail and also to know that you don't force that to stay in the mix now that you do have a daughter.
Yeah. That's out of the window. But my like college and early post-college years, that I had a spreadsheet a mile wide of every league and every team. It was fun, but not worth it.
Did I ever make it into one of your notebooks? I would love to know what my tendencies are.
Yeah, I'll have to look back. I think you did. I think you both did, actually. It's at some point. So
wow, I was just trying to remember if I had actually played against you in a Dynasty league at any point, or I guess maybe redraft. I don't know how extensive the spreadsheet went, but yeah, feel free to look up our tendencies and let us know for a future episode. I was inspired to ask this question because I think I realized in getting ready for the show, first of all, I'm just a draft addict in general. Drafting in fantasy is easily my favorite aspect of the whole game, whatever format we're talking about. And I think a Dynasty Superflex startup draft might be my single favorite draft format because, the best thing about drafting, the thing I love about it is figuring it out on the fly, adjusting to that specific draft, figuring out where the player values are, figuring out how you're going to react to and beat your league mates in that specific draft. And I think the more that you add to it in terms of details, the more fun that is. I don't like to go crazy like, oh, kickoff return touchdowns are 27 points. And, I don't, not goofy rules that don't make sense, but things that are sensible. That's my jam for fantasy. So if we're getting into Dynasty and Superflex and a startup draft, you already add the layer of you're building this team for a long time. So it's not just this year. So, that makes you think about it differently. Throw in some IDPs. I'm in heaven there. So we're going to talk through like exactly how we approach those drafts. We're not going to get too specific on format. We will talk some super flex. Let's start with kind of the broadest terms: win now versus building for later. Jared, to me, that's a question that people kind of think about a little bit too much, especially when they're starting up. What do you think about winning now versus building for later? What are you doing? What's your mindset for building that initial dynasty roster?
So I think both strategies can obviously work, but to me, the biggest piece of advice I'd give listeners in dynasty startup drafts is to pick a lane, whether it's, winning now or, building for later, and be disciplined to stay in that lane throughout your draft. I think, we talk about in redraft being flexible and being willing to, kind of adjust on the fly. I think in a dynasty startup draft, you want to be more rigid in your strategy. Now, you don't have to decide before the draft which path you're taking, but early on, you want to decide whether you're, going for a win now, or I'd rather call it like asset collection is like the other path you could take, not necessarily like a rebuild or building for later, but winning now is self-explanatory. You're prioritizing immediate production in your picks. To me, the other path is like asset collection, and that's prioritizing players who are going to increase in dynasty value in the next few years. So, oftentimes that's young players or rookie picks. Could also be players who you think are going to just produce better than expected in the coming year and, grow in value that way. So to me, the worst thing you can do is kind of straddle that line between winning now and asset collection, building for later. That's kind of how you end up with a team that finishes in the middle of the pack. And that's kind of, that's the worst place to be in dynasty. You either want to be competing for a title in the current year, or you want to be not tanking, but more looking ahead, looking to peak the following year, 2 years down the road.
Yeah, I would say drafting into any format, one key is to make sure that your picks make sense for your team. You don't want to just take, the best player at every single turn, because then you're not necessarily putting together a cohesive roster. So figuring out how that cohesion happens is key. Shane, are you setting yourself up for win now, build later, something more specific? Like, I personally can't imagine going into a dynasty startup draft and not thinking about competing right away in that first season.
I think we've learned that you can compete with a young roster. If you had drafted like all rookies last year, I mean, you could have been very competitive with Malik Neighbors and Brock Bowers and Lam McConkey and Brian Thomas and Bucky Irving, right? You could have built a pretty good roster that was in competition and still very young, that felt at the time like a build for later. I'm with Jared. My main dynasty strategy is building assets that are going to appreciate in value and trade value. I use trading a ton in my dynasty leagues. That's how I get to compete. So I would rather draft kind of a building those assets, a quote, build for later, but players that I think are going to get better and their value is going to go up over, maybe it's not a season or 2 seasons, maybe it's half a season is fine, right? So I think that's how to think about it. Is I don't want guys that are going to depreciate in value, even if they're going to score decent fantasy points for me. I can find a younger version of that, probably take a couple shots at a younger version of that later in the draft. I think you can play value, if you have 8, 9, 10 of the 12 teams in your league building for later, then there comes a point when you're like, yeah, I'll take a Joe Mixon, I'll take an Alvin Kamara. I mean, those are players that their value didn't depreciate much from last year to this year. Mixon went from RB21 and ADP to RB25. Kamara actually went up from RB25 to RB24. So I think sometimes when we think of, I got to play young, I got to build for later, we think they got to be like under 24 years old or something. You can get guys in their mid to late 20s and still be assets that can appreciate in value. So that's generally my strategy. I'll take underperforming young players, second or third year receivers late in drafts that are going to hold value. Rookies generally hold value. So I think there's a lot of ways to build those assets up and see that appreciation of value. And then if your team is surprisingly competitive or more competitive than you thought, that's what trading is for. And you can trade those players for guys that are going to score in your fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, I think to me, the mistake in the whole win now versus play for later setting is treating them as distinct buckets, like saying I can either try to win this season or I can gather a bunch of young guys and compete for longer. It definitely does not have to be one or the other of those things. You can get a competitive young team. You can at some point take advantage of older guys that are sliding in the draft without necessarily saying, well, I'm just dedicating this roster to winning this season and then we'll figure out the future later on. I think you have to have all of that in view as you're setting up your team. We'll talk a little bit more about what to do with those rookie picks, but setting that base, those first 3 rounds of a dynasty startup draft, or, maybe it's first 2 rounds, maybe it goes beyond those 3 rounds, just in general. Jared, what are you looking to do within those first few rounds of your draft to set that base?
My big thing in the first 3 rounds, this is the range I'm most willing to trade up to go and get guys. Because in my experience, and I think you guys would agree, the dynasty leagues and fantasy leagues in general are won by having elite producers, having the difference makers. And you obviously, for the most part, are going to find those in the early rounds of dynasty startup drafts. I have a few dynasty teams that are super deep. They have no real difference makers, and those teams have struggled to, win dynasty championships. They're fine. They're those kind of middle of the pack teams that you don't want. So, not saying that depth is a bad thing, but to me, it's super important to have those elite producers, have as many of them as you can. So to me, in the early rounds, I'm willing to, trade up to get a guy, maybe trade a future rookie pick to get, back into the first 3 rounds, but just trying to collect as many of those elite producers as I can.
Shane, are you moving around in those early rounds like Jared is?
I am, but I'm not always moving up. I think it depends on the format too. We'll talk superflex a little bit. That I'm a little more willing if I want those 2 quarterbacks to try to get multiple first round picks and lock up more of those elite producers with the longevity of quarterback. I think it makes sense. I'll generally try to target receivers first, and that's where I think Jared's point of those elite producers. I mean, if you're getting a Jamar Chase, I think you're feeling good that he is going to continue producing for a number of years. But I've seen a lot of managers taking running backs in the first round that do fall off quickly, or rookies, second-year players that we don't know are elite producers. So to me, I'll move down. I would rather almost gather kind of round 2, round 3 picks, and you're still getting a similar level of player, maybe slightly older than people are considering. Sure, you're going to get a couple managers that are going super young, that are taking Ashton Genty at 6 or 7, and you can kind of sit back and take a Garrett Wilson, take a Rashee Rice, guys like that are falling into the late second, early third round.
It sounds like you guys could fit together well in the same league. You can just trade the picks that the other one's looking for.
That's what makes Dynasty so fun, right? I mean, there's just so many different ways to play it, and all these techniques and strategies can work if you execute them in the right way.
Yeah, that's something I neglected to mention in the whole setup. Is there are lots of different strategies that can work. If something doesn't go quite the way you were hoping to, there's time to make up for that later on. So, it's just another fun aspect of the format. I think I'm probably less driving trades than it sounds like you guys are in your dynasty play. I'm willing to move up. I'm willing to move down. I'm probably not the one sending out those trades early in the draft, though, because one thing that I don't do well, and I don't think people do well in general, is value your own assets versus other people's assets. Like, I know that I'm going to look at the stuff that I have and view it as more valuable than it is. I'm probably going to undervalue some pieces that other people are trying to sell to me. I'm more likely to sit there and see what the offers are that come in. I would tend to lean more toward trading down a little bit, unless it's a specific player that I'm targeting and that I'm able to get without overpaying. But like you said, Shane, I would kind of rather drift back a little bit, pick up some extra picks in these early rounds where there are going to be lots of really good players. And there are going to be some players that do increase in value, like we were talking about with asset collection earlier. So I tend to be the guy that if you come to me with a trade because you're targeting a specific guy and you're overpaying a little bit to get that spot, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll give up that player, for this year, the next couple of years. And then I'm going to get a couple more assets that are higher value than I would have gotten otherwise in those early rounds of the draft. Position wise, it's going to depend on obviously the format and exactly who makes it to me on the board. But I want to be flexible within that format. I'm not going in like I've got to get my number 1 wide receiver by the end of round 2. I've got to get this many wide receivers by this certain range. I think to me that can get you into trouble when you're targeting positions. I think in redraft, it's a problem to be targeting a position and then to reach for the next guy at that position because you wanted a receiver there and a bunch of them went off the board. I think it's an even bigger issue in Dynasty because there's even more room to fix that weak spot that you don't like as much coming out of the draft. So if you are reaching for that next guy and you're thinking, I don't like this player that much, but all the running backs are disappearing, that you're always going to be wrong with that kind of thinking because all of the nothing is disappearing. There will be players available. So just make sure that you're drafting for value as opposed to taking the next guy on the list before that position dries up. So we hit that early trading, talked some about trading rookie picks. Let's get more specifically into those rookie picks because that can be a key aspect for working trades in the startup draft. And, I see every time I do a startup draft, I see people that are collecting rookie picks for the next year and year beyond that. And I see people who are willing to just sell off their rookie picks. So that's out there. Jared, are you more likely to be on one or the other side of those?
Yeah, this to me is the trickiest part of startup drafts is how to value the rookie picks in relation to these, NFL players that are going off the board. This is where I'm glad we have Shane, at least in the leagues I'm not competing against him, because Shane has intimate knowledge of the incoming rookie classes, not just the following year, but 2 years down the road. Shane already has an idea of how those picks should be valued. That's all built into the tools on DraftShark, so we can definitely help with that. But it is tricky during a draft to weigh, a rookie pick versus a exciting veteran that's sitting on the board for you to take. So it all depends on the league. I think, as you alluded to, Matt, some leagues you're going to get in, you're going to find rookie hungry competitors that are willing to overpay for these picks. I've found leagues where this is the time I'm most willing to trade for rookie picks because I think other owners see that shiny current producer sitting on the board in a startup draft and are willing to trade away a future first rounder for maybe cheaper than it should be. So it all depends. I would say again, though, make sure how you're treating rookie picks aligns with your overall strategy. If you're building more of a team that's trying to win now, you should be less likely to, trade for rookie picks. If you are building a younger, asset collection type team, that's a spot where you might be, more interested in acquiring future picks.
In figuring out how to value those picks, I think it's important to think about how that player is likely to fit in the rankings at the positions, with where they are in your current draft. So for example, if somebody's looking to trade a rookie pick the following year, look at where you are in the draft, how many running backs are gone, how many wide receivers are gone, and think how likely is that first round rookie pick next year to be, wide receiver 15 in the current rankings. And then that helps you figure out if it makes sense to get that pick, to trade away that pick, where it's eventually going to fit in. If you look at the Dynasty strategy article on DraftSharks.com, you're going to see one of the main tips says trade away your rookie picks. That's the side I tend to be on. I know Alex, our coworker, tends to lean that way as well. Big Dynasty trader there, by the way. Shane, where are you at on treating rookie picks in your startup draft?
This is the cheapest that rookie picks are ever going to be. That is in the startup draft. I mean, to me, this is the time to get those rookie picks. And it's a bold strategy, but I have definitely executed the gathering as many rookie picks as possible. Jared and I are in a Pros versus Joe's Dynasty Best Ball League started in 2020. I ended up with 8 future first round rookie picks in that draft. My first pick wasn't until the 7th round. And I finished in the money in 2023. I just won the league in 2024. Now trading away those, right? I actually traded away my 2025 first to Jared to secure that victory, right? So the thing is, and Matt, I think your example of where they slot, I don't really care because I can trade that rookie pick before I ever get that player. And I did that I didn't pick all 8 of these picks. They're going to appreciate and value no matter how poor or good the class is. We know people are going to get hungry for the rookies when they start watching and people are tweeting out. So you can always trade those future firsts to kick it down the line a little bit more. If you end up drafting pretty well in those later rounds, the 7th, 8th, 9th round, you can do that. But I just kept moving down, gathering up rookie firsts. You have to be in the right league where people are willing to give those away. You also have to be on it. I mean, you have to be the first one to try to get those rookie picks, because if someone else is trying to execute that same strategy, then it's not going to work out. So it's a risky business, but you can really set yourself up well for the future. And now I have a pretty dominant team, despite a lot of my startup picks and a lot of my rookie picks in that year. I'd say 3 of those, I think I picked 7 of those 8. 3 of those 7 were busts, and I still have a pretty dominant team now. And a lot of that is just having enough assets to say, okay, my hit rate might be 50% on these. That's all I need if I have this many. So that's a very viable strategy that not a lot of people are willing to put their neck out on the line to do. You have to be in a league where you're willing to invest that money up front. It's going to cost you years and cost you buy-ins, but you can have a really good long-term team if this is a league that's going to last for a long time.
That particular example sounds to me like something that worked out for you as opposed to something to recommend trying out in general. Like, so I guess first off, this particular league where you stacked up the rookie picks going forward, did you then, you said you didn't draft for your first player until like round 7. Does that mean you had something like 8 picks in round 7 and 8 in this particular draft?
Yeah, I had 4 picks in round 7, 3 picks in round 8. That was kind of my sweet spot of where I liked the players there. I think I ended up taking, this is 2020, Deontay Johnson, Deebo Samuel. I drafted Justin Herbert later. So there's some players that I liked in that range. I said, okay, this is where I feel comfortable getting down. And that's kind of where the rookie first dried up. I also traded for some rookie seconds and used that capital during the first year and before that first year's rookie draft to also trade away and build the team a little bit more.
You can also find Shane in the club in a t-shirt that says, this is where I feel comfortable getting down. I'm much more like, so I like that you're getting those rookie picks and moving down as opposed to just, sending away your 4th round pick for a rookie pick. And I'm always surprised at the number of people I see playing for the second season in that Dynasty League and beyond that, as opposed to trying to win now, as well as build a team that's going to compete later, because all of those rookie picks are even more uncertain assets than the players that you're drafting at any point in the current draft. I think that people in general, fantasy players in general, are more excited about those rookie picks than I am. And I think that they believe that those picks are going to turn into players who pay off more than they are actually likely to. And just to look at specific examples of that, like if we just look back at 2024 rookie draft ADP, Trey Benson, Blake Corum were end of first round picks. Jalen Polk was in the middle of round 2. 2023, we had Quentin Johnston in the middle of round 1, who doesn't seem like he's working out to be a high-level asset at that level. Zach Charbonnet was a round 1 guy. Kendre Miller was at the fringe. Jonathan Mingo, beginning of round 2. So those are the kind of guys that come to mind for me when I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and send away that pick next year because I like the player that it's going to get me in this, round 5, round 6 of this year, who's not only going to help me compete this season, but is also going to be young enough to stick with my team going forward. And that I already know is a good NFL player, as opposed to taking a shot on this nebulous asset that I hope I'm going to be able to turn into a high value player.
I'm going to disagree with you when you say rookie picks are uncertain assets. They're uncertain assets when you make the pick on the rookie. Now, you also said that other owners tend to overvalue rookie picks, which I agree with. And that's why I think Shane's strategy of collecting these rookie picks works. Because to me, if we think about a dynasty roster as collecting assets, rookie picks are the safest asset because they're not playing football. They can't get hurt. Ashton Genty seems super safe right now as a dynasty asset. If he tears his ACL this coming season, I don't even want to say that, but if it happened, he's losing value. That rookie pick can't lose value. It's just, it's going to climb in value the closer you get to the coming draft. So I think if you think about rookie picks that way, not as actual rookies that are going to be on your team in future years, that's where collecting the rookie picks and treating them as trade chips, as assets. I think that's how and why the strategy can work.
That's a good point. Probably another aspect of me not collecting those picks, not tending to go down that road of collecting those, is during the season and even throughout the year, I don't like putting a whole lot of time into working out trades. I would rather kind of manage my roster and, accept trades and go after trades sometimes, but I'm not the most active trader in my league. So maybe I'm just less willing to get assets like that, the best way to kind of build on them is to work them into future trades.
You got to be trade hungry. I think that's how Dynasty works, like the best. And what I've seen over the years playing in Dynasty for 20 years is what people are less willing to trade now than they used to be. People are scared to lose on social media essentially. And I think that's why with rookie picks, you can trade them away because that future first always looks good on Twitter. That looks good that I'm getting that future first. So you can trade that away. And I think it even is gaining more value than it used to 10 years ago, even if it's a bad class, even if it's a class people are talking down. So if you're if you're willing to be active in trading, then I think getting picks can be very helpful, like Jared said. And I think if you're not, if you're more like Matt, you're going to manage, you're going to see what comes in, then I think having those proven players works. And that's why there are these different strategies that can work for different types of players.
Yeah, if we were all doing it the same way, then it would be a weird league. How do those future firsts play on Blue Sky, by the way?
Not quite as good. Not quite as good as the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Let's jump over to Superflex specifically now. From our strategy article, you'll see that we generally say secure a top quarterback early, be strategic with that second quarterback after that. And obviously, that's the big difference with Superflex is you don't have to start two quarterbacks, but you're going to want to be able to start two quarterbacks. So, Jared, how do you start out your Superflex build? When do you try to get that first quarterback? And then what do you do beyond that?
As far as the first one, if you just look at our Superflex Dynasty rankings right now, overall, the top 3 players are quarterbacks. 5 of the first 9 are quarterbacks, and 11 of the first 19 are quarterbacks. So just based on that, I think you'll want to get at least one quarterback through 2 rounds. It doesn't have to be in the first round. If you miss out on those, top 3, top 5 guys, it's okay to, take an elite position player instead. But I think in that case, you're going to probably want to take one in the second so you don't get, totally caught out of the position. And then just thinking overall, to me, when you take your second isn't as important as in Superflex Dynasty. I really want to make it a priority to get 3 valuable quarterbacks, maybe locked in starters. If not locked in starters, like that third one, at least like a young player who is going to get a chance at some point over the next year or two. I just think quarterbacks are significantly more valuable in Dynasty Superflex than they are even in redraft Superflex, because of the longevity at the position. If you get a quarterback, they're going to produce for 10 plus years for you. And on top of that, go back to talking about trading and assets. Quarterbacks in Superflex are just so valuable on the trade market because there's only tops 32 of them, and usually not even 32 guys you can count on. So they're just super valuable. So you kind of can't have too many good quarterbacks in Superflex, and I kind of approach it that way in startup drafts.
Yeah, I want to get 3 NFL starters on my team at the very least, and then if I look beyond that and other teams are pushing them down the board, then I don't mind taking a 4th one or taking one of those younger guys like you're talking about, who's not necessarily a starter now, but might get the opportunity or is a high value backup, something along those lines. But I agree that at the top of the draft, a big key can be not reaching for that next quarterback. Like I mentioned with positions in general, but even at quarterback and Superflex, not necessarily reaching for the next guy because you're afraid it's going to dry up. So Shane, where is that first quarterback coming for you? Is there a certain number of quarterbacks on the current list of Dynasty rankings where, that's your cutoff?
I like getting a quarterback in the first if the value's there. I talk about trading down and gathering these rookie picks, but Superflex drafts, that's where I'm with you guys and willing to maybe move up. If I can secure 2 elite quarterbacks, I've had some Superflex startups where teams willing to trade down from the mid first, and I have a high first round pick, and I'm able to move up from my second to the mid first and take 2 elite guys. That sets you up to be a step above everyone else. Or as Jared said, you have that trade value if you really want to trade away that elite quarterback down the line. But I'm not afraid to wait for that second quarterback to, 4th, 5th round, maybe double tap, do a second and third, get a more proven veteran and a younger player. And like Matt, like you said, if teams are passing on the quarterback position, I've had leagues where I've taken 5, I've taken 6. Someone's going to come asking during the season. And again, a risky bet, but I like taking risks in dynasty startups, if you couldn't tell. So I'll take 6 quarterbacks, and you're going to ring the phone at some point when you're contending and have one quarterback on your roster. That's when I can really extract that value from you.
Unfortunately, you won't be able to do that in an FFPC startup because they cut you off at 3. I remember finding that out in a rookie draft or in a startup draft. It was like, I can't steal this 4th quarterback that the rest of my league is passing on. So one complaint about the format there, but I still play it, so I can't hate it that much. We're not talking too much on specific players here, but for me at quarterback right now, it's basically the top 6 ending with Jalen Hurts in our quarterback rankings for Dynasty. Like, I'll probably start my draft with one of those 6 if they're on the board when my turn comes up. And then if those 6 are gone, that's when I start looking at the other non-quarterback positions and thinking about taking one of those and maybe pushing that first quarterback to round 2, or thinking about what I do beyond that. Jared, is that around the level where you'd be?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think those 6 guys, it's Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts. Those guys definitely belong in round 1. You could even argue they should just be the top 6 players, because all 6 of those guys either have the upside to finish as quarterback 1 in the coming season, or have the upside to be like a top 3 quarterback for the next 5+ years. That's just super valuable. Beyond that, I think the rest of the guys, then we're getting into Caleb Williams, Justin Herbert, some of these younger guys, Drake May, those are definitely the types I'm going to take the elite wide receivers, maybe even a running back or 2 over them. And again, if you go farther down the rankings, it looks like right around quarterback 11, quarterback 12 is where we show a tier drop off. So that's again where I want to get at least one of those top 12 guys, if not 2 of them. And I think in most super flex drafts, you're going to see that tier of quarterbacks gone by the end of round 2. So that's why I say I think you want at least one by the end of the second round.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to get one of those elite guys, not only because it sets your team up with this elite scorer at the most important position, but it also then frees up your strategy, because if you are in a league where everybody's like, oh, I got to get a quarterback, then you can get value at the other spots and wait several rounds and then take a couple of quarterbacks and then just figure out that QB2 spot going forward. Or if the rest of your league's like, no, I'm not reaching for a quarterback here, maybe you can get another high level quarterback early. So, having that flexibility is always key for me. Shane, let's move on now to common mistakes. What is either a common, or if you got a couple from that gigantic spreadsheet of yours, what are some common mistakes that you see drafters make in their startups?
Not to bash on you, Matt, but I think not trading is probably the biggest thing. Just not being willing to. You don't have to necessarily be someone that's out there sending trades every pick or trying to move up, trying to move down. But I've seen a lot of people just be very rigid. I'm going to draft it at the 111 and I'm going to take my players. And I think it's very difficult when you do that to, as Jared mentioned earlier, either be at the top or the bottom, unless you draft really, really poorly. I think it's tough to have a focus when you're just kind of sitting there taking the players and looking at it that way. And I think just not looking ahead at, ADP rankings, having tiers, understanding what rounds maybe are at the end of tiers, what rounds are at the beginning of tiers. Like we talked about the quarterbacks, you have those 6 guys. I've seen a lot of people go into drafts and they don't know the difference between the top 6 quarterbacks. Is there 6? Is there 12? Is there 18 that are good? I don't know. I like to really kind of figure out, okay, the 4th and 5th round is where the end of that kind of big second tier of quarterbacks is. So maybe I can move down from the 3rd to the 5th and I can pick up some extra value up there. I like the 5th through the 7th. I try to figure out beforehand which rounds do I kind of like the value where ADP and rankings are, and make moves to get there, while people who aren't looking at that, like, oh, this seems good, I can move up here. And then where there is kind of rich rounds of, I wish I had 2 or 3 picks in the 7th. Now they have none, and I have those.
First off, I don't think that you give fantasy advice or opinions without being willing to take on bashers. So please, anytime that you feel like a bashing is due, I'm available for it. And secondly, just for the record, I am absolutely a willing trader in startup drafts. I'm not the one building those trade packages, but if you're trying to move up or interested in who wants to move down, feel free to send me an offer, because I'm always listening. The thing that I enjoy most about drafting in general and about the format, like we talked about, is being able to stay flexible, having a good sense of how the players fit together value-wise and fit across positions. And, to me, that's part of trading is, even if I'm not necessarily thinking I want to move up or I want to move down here, somebody sends me an offer, I'm like, all right, let me look and see what I can get there if I make this move, or let me see who I could target right here if that person's trying to move down. I mean, that stuff is the most fun. Jared, what's a common mistake for you?
Yeah, I was going to say there's definitely a negative correlation between number of kids and number of trade offers made in Dynasty leagues. I've definitely found my number of offers sent out at least has gone down at least a little since we added our second. So you're okay there, Matt. I understand you have other stuff to worry about.
I have one about to go to college, so we'll see. Maybe my trades are about to go.
Yep, about to move up. Here it comes.
Exactly. Biggest mistake in startup drafts I see. I'm going to go back to what we talked about at the very top. To me, it's just drafting a team that ends up getting stuck in the middle. Doesn't have enough current year firepower to really compete for a title, but it also doesn't have enough future assets where this team's going to grow in value over the next 2 years and maybe be able to win a championship in 3 years. I think you need to really think hard about how you're building the team, what you want to accomplish. And to me, I know it's not easy, but you really want to pick a time frame that this team is going to peak. It might be in current upcoming season. It might be the year after. It might even be, 2, 3, 4 seasons down the road, but kind of pick a lane and have a vision for the team and don't just kind of go willy nilly. And that's how you just end up with a team that's going to finish in 5th place for the next 3 years. And that's no fun.
It's certainly, like we said, important to have cohesion to how you're building your roster. I think, though, a mistake that I see that can still fit, even if you're, targeting youth and trying to build for the long term, I think that there's still lots of overrating youth in Dynasty. It's obviously important to get good players that are young and are going to produce for a while. And if 2 guys are close, I'm certainly going to favor the younger player. But every single Dynasty startup I've been in, there is overrating of youth at the expense of passing over, still very valuable and high producing veterans. So I love scooping guys that are 27, 28, and just other Dynasty managers are scared off them because they're loading up on 24-year-old, 23-year-old wide receivers who might even not have produced yet. Those guys are still uncertain performers going forward. Just because he's younger doesn't mean that he's necessarily on an upward trajectory. He might just be that guy, whereas this player is already a stud, is going to be a stud for another 2 or 3 years. And yeah, he might wear down sooner, but I can plan for that going forward. I can make trades after my draft to shore up a spot where maybe I don't have as much youth as I would like, or take guys later in the draft who don't have a clear role yet, but have youth on their side and can become something that will be helpful for my team.
Yeah. And of course, youth matters more at some positions than other, right? I mean, specifically running back is the position where I want to be as young as possible. And that's why we worked so hard on our aging curves, which are part of our Dynasty rankings, is because 28 years old means a lot different at running back than it does at wide receiver or quarterback. Don't just draft youth to draft it, but kind of know how it matters at each different position.
I think don't be afraid to draft busts. Let's say we take Matt's strategy, which I love. Taking some of those players that are a little bit older that people are scared away from. I built a pretty good starting roster, but now I need a little more youth. I mean, if you take in the last 5, 6 rounds of your draft, you're just throwing darts at young players. You only need one of those 6 to hit, and that was worth it. I think that sometimes people feel like they have to hit on every pick. Every pick has to be perfect. I'm expecting half my picks to bust. In the startup, in the rookie drafts, 50, if I hit 50%, I'm going to win this league. And I think you need to approach it and not be afraid to take risks on some players, especially late, that if they blow up, I know the upside's there, that this could be a really good asset, but I'm fine if they do nothing and I can discard them and try again next year.
Yeah, good point. And, that gets back to the roster cohesion. If I've already drafted a roster of, let's say NFL middle-aged players that I know I'm going to start, then I'm not looking to draft guys who are going to start the next year or 2 late in my draft. That's where I'll stack those youthful players and try to keep my roster producing for years beyond when my starting wide receivers might be done. The biggest mistake you can make in your Dynasty startup draft is to not sync it with draftsharks.com, because when you sync, you get the draft war room that is connected with your league. You get rankings and in-draft strategy that are specific to your league. You will have an easier time adapting to the particulars of your draft as you go. You're going to know better than anyone how the players across positions fit together and where the value lies at every turn throughout your draft. And then after you're done, that same sync is going to help you manage that roster for as long as you stick with that league. It's got the best trade tools and advice in the industry, waiver help, even lineup assistance, because, we're talking about the long term here, but once you get into the season, you still got to set a lineup every week. So you're going to want to know who your best starting options are any given week. We got you on that front too. And we will know via the sync the particulars of your league and what makes sense for your specific roster. Whether you're an experienced Dynasty player or about to jump into your first ever Dynasty startup, Draft Sharks is here to be your unfair advantage.